It cannot be understated how much the X Games did to legitimize action sports in the eyes of the general public. Before it, sports like skateboarding and BMX were mainly viewed as activities only taken up by rowdy teenagers. Once the 90s came along, both sports were experiencing some growing pains, but with the backing of ESPN and a presentation style that could appeal to a wider audience, the X Games turned legends of these sports into legends of the public eye. Despite numerous different competitions taking place at every X Games event, it was on the Vert ramp where legacies were made in every sport. BMX had Matt Hoffman and Dave Mira, while rollerblading saw the domination of the Yasutoko brothers and Brazilian phenom Fabiola da Silva. But if you know anything about the X Games, it's likely because of skateboarding, and even more likely because of Tony Hawk. Funny thing about Tony though, he arguably wasn't even the best vert skater of the 80s boom period, but he was the best to survive its decline. In skateboarding, the early 90s were defined by two things: the rise of street skating and the death of vert skating. It only made financial sense, especially with a recession hitting the US during that same period. Vert ramps are expensive to build, so there aren't going to be a large amount of them. On the flip side, you can street skate anywhere. Street skating turned cities and towns into concrete playgrounds, causing an innovation boom in the space as skaters like Rodney Mullen, Mark Gonzalez, and Natas Campos became the new faces of the sport. Vert skaters that had previously been making great money were now seeing their careers go into free falls faster than most could react. The financial woes of this market crash turned household names into nobodies and pushed many out of the sport as it just wasn't a sustainable career anymore. That included Tony Hawk's main rival from the 80s, Christian Hosoi. After a number of failed ventures led him to facing bankruptcy, a drug habit that began in the 80s grew even worse in the 90s. Hosoi was actually invited to the first X Games, as ESPN wanted to market the event as being the next chapter of Hawk vs. Hosoi, but being on the run from the cops at the time, Christian declined the invitation, laying low until he was finally arrested for drug trafficking in 2000 at a Hawaiian airport. In contrast, Tony Hawk would use this opportunity to prove himself to be the perfect ambassador for the sport on its biggest stage. Well-spoken, clean-cut, and sporting a bag full of tricks to rival anyone, Tony was just the type of athlete the X Games needed. And so, finally, with a major corporation to foot the bill and show off the sport once again, the high-flying nature of vert skating captured audiences' eyes like no other. With a new platform established, vert was seen as cool again, and the competition was stiff every year, with Hawk himself never winning consecutive gold medals in the main event. The first person to do so would be Bucky Lasek, who turned pro at 17 right as vert was falling out of favor and had his career revived by this new surge in popularity for the discipline. But to accomplish such a feat, Bucky had to skate the run of his life. The gold medalist in 1999, Bucky had the final run in 2000. After ending run 1 in first and upping his score in his second run, most thought Bucky would be able to take a victory lap on his third and final run, but Canadian Pierre-Luc Gagnon, who would go on to dominate vert competitions in the 2000s, put up a jaw-dropping score of 95 to bump Bucky down to second. Then Bucky proceeded to put the commentators in stitches with the best score in X Games skateboard vert history at a 98.5. A switch hand plant set the tone early, soon followed by a McTwist into an inverted frontside 540 on back-to-back walls. From that point on, it was anything goes. A 360 into a switch frontside 180 set up for a jaw-dropping, fakey frontside heel flip 360 that made commentator Sal Masekela lose his mind in the booth, and Bucky followed it up on the very next wall with a backflip, then just kept the hits coming. In the final 8 seconds of his run, Bucky managed to throw in a switch inverted frontside 540 and a no-grab ollie 360 to finish things off. As a complete run, it's still incredible, and the fact that Bucky managed to pull off all of this in a do-or-die moment makes it even more impressive. But you've probably never seen this run. Nobody talks about it. It's like it never happened. Its legacy as the highest scoring skateboard vert run in X Games history has been taken from it by a run that scored lower. Even X Games promotional material showcases a different run. So, what happened? The run that stole the legacy of Bucky Lasek in 2000 is no slouch in its own right. With Bucky on the verge of three-peating in 2001, his close friend Bob Burnquist would drop in. Bob's run would leave Tony Hawk screaming on commentary, as his combination of switch stance tricks and an absolutely mind-boggling save produced a run that looked like it was about to fall off the rails at any moment, yet Bob kept riding away. Bob gets 3 walls into his run before a less than perfect landing off a McTwist causes him to wobble heading into the 4th wall at high speed, but he keeps it together to everyone's shock. Only a few walls later, he goes for a switch kickflip to forward, but catches the board upside down in mid-air and somehow manages to correct the mistake just in time to land safely. It's one of the craziest things I've ever seen in sports. Bob had literal milliseconds to 1. Figure out that he'd made a mistake, and 2. Choose if he could correct it in time to land or if bailing would be the safer option. I can watch this run 1,000 times, and every time I get to that trick, I will always think he's about to fall on his ass. It's absolutely mind-boggling that he was able to pull it off. And like Bucky the year prior with his no-grab 360, Bob capped off his run with a heat check. A blunt to kickflip to fakie that seemed as inevitable as it did improbable. The perfect encapsulation of what makes this run legendary. And maybe that's why people remember it more than Bucky's, why the X Games promotes it, and why it's considered the greatest vert run of all time. The failure of Bucky's run, as antithetical as it sounds, is that it was too clean. It looked like a professional doing his job. It never seemed like he was about to fail. Whereas Bob's run, with all its weird jagged edges and near misses, makes it so clear that this shit ain't easy. The run so clearly sells the difficulty of what these athletes are able to do in the most understandable way, how close they are to disaster on any given trick with the height and speed they're getting. There's a beauty in that, in seeing something difficult still look difficult even as it's pulled off by a professional. It would seem to humanize the sport in a way that made tricks rarely do, while failed tricks often do so with the added worry over the athlete's safety. Sketchy tricks show us that these athletes aren't robots, without reminding us that we are mere mortals in a fragile human body. Even rewatching these runs for this video, Bob's run pulled more emotion out of me even though I'd seen it hundreds of times, while Bucky's run from 2000 was only recently uploaded to YouTube, and not even by the official X Games account. For over 20 years, it was basically lost media that no one cared about finding. Watching it back, I understand why. It's an incredible run, but it looks repeatable, like Bucky could have run it back in another competition had it come down to his final run. Bob's, on the other hand, there's no replicating that. All the things that went wrong and could have cut the run short, only for Bob to pull it together in the end and leave without a scratch on him. You'll see another run like Bucky's, you probably already have, but there will never be another run like Bob's.